Hey, you. You're finally awake.
I used to be an adventurer like...
The time for talking is long past.
This is my homebrew demo of Skyrim running on real PlayStation hardware, not a modern PC game with the PS1 filter. The original PlayStation came out in 1994, and Skyrim came out in 2011. So the hard part wasn't just making Skyrim uglier, it was figuring out what could survive inside 2 MB of RAM, 1 MB of VRAM, and a 34 MHz CPU. So I started with the one scene everyone remembers. The cart intro is basically what everyone remembers first about playing Skyrim. I started by importing the cart and blocking out the scene. Once the cart had basic textures, it at least started to read as the right object, but the scene still had no life. The real problem was Ralof. The first version looked less like a Nord prisoner and more like a budget Silent Hill enemy who had been folded into the cart. Fixing the sitting pose helped, but the face was still the part that had to carry the scene. So I gave the face its own texture to get more detail, which worked for about 5 seconds before a UV issue made half his body disappear. Once that was fixed, he finally looked readable enough for the intro line to work. Then I added the line and subtitles and tried to give him a simple talking animation. Instead, he decided to deliver one of the most iconic openings in gaming history while aggressively T-posing in a prison cart.
You were trying to cross the border, right? Walked right into that Imperial ambush, same as us.
I didn't build a full 3D world outside the cart. The distant landscape is really just a few textured planes moving at different speeds, which gives that sense of depth while leaving the real geometry budget for the wagon and the characters. After fixing the animation, adding the scrolling background, and pushing the scene colder and bluer, the intro finally looked like this.
Hey, you. You're finally awake. You were trying to cross the border, right? Walked right into that Imperial ambush, same as us. And that thief over there.
I don't know about you, but creating a character is one of my favorite parts in any game, and it's no exception with the Skyrim character creator. I wanted it to really feel like the Skyrim character creator, so I added all 10 playable races. It was surprising how well it actually translated to PS1 graphics, and it was totally beginning to feel like I was playing some alternate reality version of Skyrim made in the mid-90s. The body and head tabs are mainly just there for visual flair, but every character has their own flavor text. One of the biggest challenges for this section was getting 10 races with high quality textures into the game. The PS1 only has 1 MB of VRAM total. In the character creator, the Helgen backdrop alone is roughly a 320 by 240 16-bit image, so that's about 150 kilobytes gone immediately. Each character texture is 256 by 256 at 16-bit, which is about 128 kilobytes each, so 4 races loaded at once would cost another 512 kilobytes. That puts you around 662 kilobytes before you even think about anything else, which is why it felt like 4 high-quality races was the ceiling. The trick was that I stopped trying to keep every race in VRAM at once. In the code, all 10 races still exist as full 256 by 256 textures, but when you change race, I load the selected one into a single shared preview slot in VRAM, and reuse that same texture page every time. So instead of paying for 10 character textures at once, I only ever pay for 1. Now I needed somewhere to actually test movement, enemies, terrain, and the most important Skyrim feature of all, getting launched into the sky. So I built this small snowy road, added some trees, and tried to give it a proper background. The first attempt went about as well as expected, but after fixing that, I got Bleak Falls Barrow and the snowy landscape into the distance, and suddenly the area had an actual sense of place. I also made the floor less flat, then adjusted the player's height based on the ground underneath. It sounds like a small thing, but this became one of the core systems that made every later area work. And once I had a snowy road, there was only one responsible thing to add: a giant. At first he was just standing there menacingly, but after importing the walk animation, he started patrolling around the map. Then I added his attack animation, and made it so that if he hit the player, it launched them directly into the atmosphere. Perfect. The dumbest part of Skyrim had survived the PS1. The giant was funny, but the project still wasn't really playable, so I added a first-person mode with 2 swords. The weapons are attached directly to the camera, so instead of animating a full player body, the hands are basically a small first-person puppet that moves with the view. And it works surprisingly well, at least until I added the first attack animation, which looked less like a sword swing, and more like I was politely tapping someone on the shoulder. So I reworked the animation, made the arms alternate attacks, and suddenly combat had a lot more impact. After that, I needed an enemy that wasn't 20 feet tall, so I added a bandit. The first version had a small texture problem where apparently every texture in the game decided to fight for control of his body. Once that was fixed, I added his animations, health bar, hit detection, and basic attack logic. So now I had a proper little combat encounter, but this was still Skyrim, so obviously hitting him with just a sword wasn't enough. I needed to shout him off the map. So I added Fussroda, gave it a basic knockback effect, and tested it on the bandit. And because Skyrim is also a game about checking a corpse for 3 gold and a cabbage, I added a basic looting interface for after the bandit dies. At this point I had terrain, weapons, enemies, physics, and looting. But there was one NPC line I obviously couldn't leave out. So I added a white run guard, gave him the classic first-person dialogue setup, and of course the only line that mattered.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
Perfect. The PS1 could now run the most overquoted sentence in gaming history. After the outdoor test area, I wanted something with a completely different mood, because half of Skyrim is basically wandering through dark ruins and getting jump scared by undead. So I built a small dungeon scene and imported a Draugr Death Overlord. Then I added the floor and immediately ran into one of the most annoying visual bugs in the whole project. For some reason, the floor kept flickering and mirroring itself in this horrible way, and no matter what I changed, I couldn't fully fix it. So I made the extremely professional decision to give up and use a textureless floor instead. Once the dungeon was stable, I added the fight UI, gave the Draugr a few attack animations, and added his own shout attack, where this band of attack expands outward from his body. And of course, because this is still Skyrim, I also made him lootable after the fight. But there was still one thing I hadn't done yet, the thing you absolutely can't leave out of a Skyrim video, a dragon. So I built a small tundra arena with uneven ground, a few trees, and enough space for the fight to actually breathe. The first version of the dragon was technically in the game, but he was facing the wrong direction, had no animations, and looked more like a dead museum exhibit than a boss fight. Then I got the animations working and the whole scene immediately changed. The hardest part was the fire breath. I didn't want it to be just a flat effect coming out of his mouth because then it would look cheap, but I also couldn't make some insane modern particle simulation on the PS1. On games like Vagrant Story, you could fake 3D particle effects because of the fixed camera position and top-down view, but that wasn't really possible here. So I built a simple fire attack that expands out from the mouth and then used the lighting and color around the dragon to sell the heat of the attack. Once that was working, I added the fight UI, health bars, hit logic, and enough basic boss behavior to turn it into an actual encounter. And because you can't kill a dragon in Skyrim without the game making a huge deal out of it, I also added the dragon soul absorb effect and text at the end. But after building a dragon fight, I wanted one final boss that felt completely different from everything else in the video. Once I fixed the orientation and animation issues, he started to look a lot more like an actual boss. So I gave him a short dialogue intro, loaded him into his own boss area, and had him say the line before immediately attacking. At that point, the full vertical slice was done. The intro, character creation, first-person combat, giants, looting, guards, dungeons, dragons, and a final boss. And the last step was seeing how all of it actually looked running together on the actual console.
Hey, you. Finally awake. You were trying to cross the border, right?
Time to die, hero. Die already, so I can take your stuff. Ugh.
Used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
The time for talking is long past.
This is probably the biggest PS1 project I've made so far. Not because any one part was impossible, but because Skyrim is remembered for so many different things. All of it had to be there or it would just feel like a generic fantasy game. It obviously isn't the full game, and it was never meant to be, but as a playable PS1 vertical slice, I'm really happy with how much of Skyrim's identity survived the downgrade. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing as it really helps the channel. Leave a comment below suggesting what you want to see me do next, and I'll see you in the next one.